Looks like Melissa stepped away. I was just wondering if we'd heard from anybody that they weren't going to be here. So I kind of know if I'm waiting on people.
I don't have as clean a head count as I would going into a regular meeting, Kim. But when we were setting the date, I think everybody but Dr. Smith indicated this morning time slot worked. So
okay. All right.
I do think if we give, I mean, we're 3 minutes early right now, so I imagine we'll have folks join. I think John's coming in, so we're at 4.
Good morning, Dr. Wilson.
Good morning. I wish I was a doctor.
Well, that can cover a lot of things. I'm a doctor. I just, lawyers just don't appropriately don't use that.
Right.
Senator, is that you by phone?
Yes.
Great, welcome.
I'm inclined to just wait a couple more minutes.
Okay.
If everybody doesn't mind, we know we have one agenda item, and there's Deanne. Good.
Hi, good morning.
Hi. Down here in sunny South Central Kansas. I guess you look like you're home, or is that?
Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm in Wichita for a few hours and headed to Kansas City for the weekend. Baseball, lots of baseball.
Lots of baseball. You could watch 10-year-old baseball with me. I've been doing that all week.
Well, that's what I will be doing.
Oh, really? Really? Okay. Not the Royals.
No, 10-year-old baseball.
All right.
Kim, we are definitely above a quorum head count. So I think if you're ready to get started, in the interest of time, we could go ahead and do so.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Appreciate everybody's. There's Delise. So we are in really good shape.
Yep, we have 8 of our 9 cabinet members for this special meeting.
That's probably it. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for making this special effort to have a special meeting. I think, wisely did this in light of the discussion we were having. I think it's given time for staff to prepare some information that's important to our decision, and probably for some of us to have thought a little bit more about it, which can be good. So anyway, I welcome all of you. We have no minutes to approve. So Melissa, I think maybe the way to kick this off would be for you, if you don't mind, for you to kind of go over that recap that you sent us this morning to make sure everybody's had a chance to see that. And the only other introduction I'm going to make is, I know Melissa's agonized over how to do this. She wants this to be the collective judgment of the cabinet. And so she sort of was uncertain about how far to go in leading us. But I think it's good that you did it this way. And we know we can make changes. But I think it gives us a framework to think about. So why don't you lead us through your thinking on the recap sheet that came out this morning, especially, and you may have some other things you want to bring up. So
I appreciate that, Kim, and again, thank you to cabinet members and the public tuning in for making time for a special meeting. It was really helpful to have some time to really dig deep and give thought to how best to leverage the resources we have available to address the critical needs that we have well documented in the early childhood care and education sector. So I know we've had a sequence of information over the last couple weeks that I've tried to share back to answer some of the questions that came up at our regular June 3rd cabinet meeting. So if you dial back to the email that arrived with your meeting agenda, I shared with you the response that I got regarding how the money that's transferred from the key fund to the Attorney General's office is utilized, and how the money that is transferred from the key fund to the Department of Revenue is utilized. So those are the parameters for the uses of those funds. I'm happy to answer any additional questions if I can. And if I cannot, and you continue to want more information, I can certainly continue to gather and be prepared for follow-up at our regular August meeting. So I won't dwell on those. I did provide the full history of the Key Fund and the Children's Initiative Fund over the entire lifespan of those two funds, so that it's very clear what this money has and has not been used for over time, what the ending balances of the key fund have been, what the high water mark for the key fund ending balance was was the year 2000. And you can see the ebb and flow of the tobacco settlement annual payouts. So tried to give you that background information to be the underpinning for this conversation. You then got a document that we called the prep document earlier this week, and it was the answer to the questions regarding the specific Children's Initiative Fund line items, which ones are identified as having a maintenance of effort requirement, which means if funding is increased, if you don't stay at that level in subsequent years, then it risks the loss of federal funding, as they view effort lagging from the state side of things. So we documented in the budget table the two funds that have a specific maintenance of effort requirement. In the budget table, it's the asterisk that we added to denote those two programs. And then and for those following along at home, it's the line item pass-through transfer to the Department for Children and Families that is called Child Care Services. It serves as part of the state's share of match for federal child care subsidy funding that comes from the Child Care Development Block Grant from the federal side. And it's the Infants and Toddlers Program, which KDHE oversees. That is, I would say, shorthand known as Part C services, or Tiny K. Otherwise, there are orange highlights on your budget. You can now see on screen that, and I would say that there's an error here. The pre-K pilot program should have an orange highlight as well. That denotes programs whose funding is identified as a source of state matching funds for other streams of funding. So when you have to have a cost share from the state level to draw down federal funds, or when you're applying for a special grant program, those items are identified as the effort being put into it by the state that will match up to the funding being drawn down. So we are using the pre-K pilot program for our preschool development grant match, so that should be highlighted. Everything else is somewhere somehow identified as matching funds, so you have detail in that prep document. The document this morning, and if cabinet members had not yet checked email, I would encourage you to open it up if you can, because what I didn't have in the prep document earlier this week was draft language for what the recommendation this morning might look like, and we put that together. And really, it was close to 11 or 12 last night before I really felt comfortable saying, I think this is ready. Because there are a lot of variables and considerations to keep in mind. In that document, what I thought the best course of action to do would be to recap where things stand based on the June 3rd decisions made at our cabinet meeting. So that first page is simply reminding that on June 3rd, we started with a recommendation that we adhere to the statutory guidance to transfer 102.5% of the prior year transfer from the key fund to the CIF, so effectively a 2.5% increase. That dollar amount is $1,311,581. So we did that, and then we took another set of steps to say we're going to add $1 million into the Dolly Parton Imagination Library line item in FY24, and then the balance, the $311,851, we want put into the early childhood block grant to give you, the cabinet, some extra decision-making power for grant-making purposes, and to put it in a line item where we get the most detailed information back from programs that receive CIF funding. So I wanted to remind everybody that that is the starting point. There are two policy recommendations that we made at that meeting that I left out of this mix because we are actively engaged in carrying them out, and I didn't find them relevant to today's discussion, but they do still stand, and they both pertain to Dolly Parton Imagination Library. So we are working together, a team, to present to you at August meeting to be the advisory committee for that project. And we are we will be working on a draft bill proposal for the legislature to consider when they come back around a 501c3 nonprofit. So those exist and will not be disturbed by the action today. Today we're focused on the budget recommendation itself. So this was just resetting knowledge and reminding everyone where things stand. If we move on to the next slide and move forward in the documents, I guess what the basic background from all of this evaluation of where we are, we took a look at programs that specifically are flat funded year over year and the cost of inflation since their last increase. And a couple of things became pretty clear with regard to how real costs to run their programs have changed. And the other thing that I would say, if there's anything I strongly urge today, it's that we not think of a one-time $10 million transfer, but that we think a little bit more about how we could make this a 2-year transfer and give ourselves a more measured approach. I think it works on both sides of that equation. I think for the programs receiving funds in a world where staffing up can be difficult, addressing inflationary pressures is important. Expanding capacity is also important, but that may need to be measured out over a little bit more than a single year. And that 1-year approach, it can't be replicated in the following year. I don't envision a large enough payout from the settlement agreement in 1 year to meet that same level of funding, and so it becomes a one-time grant. And I think programs become exhausted trying to figure out how they best utilize one-time money and without starting things that need to be sustained somehow. So it creates its own challenges. And for us, it's a more careful approach to how we manage the balance in the key fund and the activities of the Children's Initiative Fund. A reminder, the current balance is $31,907,562 in the key fund. From that, we need to deduct the 1.3 million or so that was already recommended. And so I think that was one of my ahas, is that when I started drafting today's recommendation, that math hadn't been done. And so it reduces our starting point today by 1.3 million. So just a reminder of the key fund ending balance as it currently stands without our recommendations being enacted. And then the $50 million number is the estimate used by the consensus revenue estimating group to plug in as an estimate for what the next cycle of master settlement agreement payout might look like. They historically lowball that number. For FY22, their estimate was 47 million and it turned out to be 61 million. So those payments are made in the springtime. So it's a prior year reimbursement basically. And so we have to do this very careful approach where we don't set our expectations for what that distribution might look like higher than is realistic. But the estimators that gathered in April did bump it up by $3 million for the next round. So those are the sort of the assumptions built into the recommendations that you have in front of you. I think we can move to the next slide. So the basic question is, should we consider for discussion is whether to make an additional transfer from the key fund ending balance to the CIF, kind of broken down over a 2-year period, beginning with the FY24 state fiscal year for targeted strategic investments as recommended by the cabinet this morning. So we can go to the next slide. This is the budget table, and I gave you the FY23 actual numbers. The small print is increases that account for both the June 3rd recommendation and potential, just a starting point for discussion, some thoughts on where we might plug some funding in today. And so it's really outlined in the written recommendation that when we look at a couple of the programs on that list, more than a couple that do not have an increase currently penciled in, there are some specific reasons why, and we can get to that when you start questions and discussions. But what we looked at was how inflation has affected the SIDS network. They do good work educating parents. Part of their work relates to smoking cessation activities. It's good effort across the state to help equip parents with knowledge about safe sleep habits, and they hold community baby showers that help provide equipment and supplies, and they do really nice work and have been flat funded for quite a long time. So adjusting for inflation over the period of time, it amounts to the $25,732 increase. Our own accountability fund has never changed. It's been $375,000 since inception. We do have the infrastructure line item, so we are able to continue taking care of business within the constraints we have with that line item. So we didn't recommend, but it is something to keep an eye on, that as our portfolio has grown more complex over time, the evaluation piece of it does require effort that has changed over time. The early childhood block grant is where this cabinet tends to have the most impact, the most interaction and decision-making capacity. That is the one line item that you truly manage. The Parents as Teachers program, home visiting, is one that we are recommending an increase. They've been those go out as grants to programs, and we've seen some difficulty meeting the needs, just the basic needs to match current effort. Inflation has really eaten into their abilities. And the others, it's not that they are not important. I'd be happy to talk line by line about reasons why you don't see recommendations, but this I want you to take as a starting point. And if there's a different resolution from your conversation, we will get there together. So I'm going to stop talking, Kim, and I know there's probably a long list of questions. So let's get to it and open this up for cabinet discussion.
All right. Who'd like to lead off with a question?
Might be easier if we go back and put that budget back on the screen.
I think that last slide where you have I think that's the most helpful.
Yep.
And just to be clear, that the 102.5% increase is included.
Yes.
In what you're recommending at the $5+ million increase. So
basically,
it's not $5 million more beyond what we recommended. It's $5 million plus beyond what we had last year.
Correct. So it's beyond where we were June 3rd. It's a $4 million increase. Okay. So just to keep that in mind, but I want to wrap in where we know we want to be from the June 3rd discussion, as a piece that we don't want to lose. So it's in there, but so we're essentially, this is suggesting an additional $4 million this year. And then in the written language of the recommendation, that says transfer $5,311,851 from the key fund ending balance to the CIF in FY24, and $5,444,473 in FY25 for targeted investments as recommended by the cabinet. We would not be deciding today where the FY25 funds plug in. This cabinet needs to visit where things are, what the April settlement agreement announcement looks like, where programs are. Parents as Teachers and even Dolly Parton may not need that level of funding repeated. So we want to name the dollar amount we'll transfer in FY25, which is the 2.5% increase plus $4 million. So, but it's a little higher number because the 2.5% builds on the ending, the value of the CIF based on the increase this year. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Let me check. Can I sort of ask it that we may be able to sort of divide this question into, first, the size of the transfer, if any, for the next 2 years, or 1 year, 2 years, whatever, and then move to how that transfer is allocated. Does that make sense to everybody? I think until we decide the amount of the excess transfer, there's no real reason to talk about the allocation. So can I get your questions, comments about this 2-year approach versus less versus more versus something else? Anybody want to have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Kim, it's John Wilson with Kansas Action for Children. I, as somebody who at the last meeting kind of recommended a big chunk of money to be allocated, I actually really appreciate this approach of smaller increments, so that we can sustain it in the long run, and also so that programs can actually utilize the funds. So I am supportive of at least 2 installment payments, and I appreciate the background documents that were shared to show maintenance of effort versus match, because I think that's really important to understand that the focus on non-MOE programs means we don't have to sustain that level of funding in perpetuity. And so I'm supportive of at least two installments of payments as a recommendation.
Okay, thanks, John. Anyone else?
This is Leetta. First of all, Melissa, thank you so much for your thoughtful and diligent, studious approach with this, because you're right. One-time money, it can have its own nightmares that come with it. So I appreciate that you put this over a 2-year period. As much as I'd love to give it all in 1 year, it really could be somewhat like we saw with the COVID relief funds, with school districts. Sometimes you just rushing, you can't spend it fast enough, and then it's gone. So I like the methodical nature of this. And I love how you presented all the historical documents. It's something that is valuable for us even beyond this situation. So, and I like your recommendations. I don't think I'd modify them, although I don't know in the weeds some of the programs. So someone may have a suggestion, but thank you.
You bet.
Other comments?
This is Tina and Graham. I just have a quick question about the Dolly Parton library. So Melissa, you mentioned that, there could be a situation where next year that funding may not be needed, and, we'll wait until the next fiscal year to allocate. Do we know for certain that the funds we're recommending for this fiscal year will be utilized and need to be utilized?
Yeah, let me clean up what I said, because I apologize for leaving that. What I meant was, moving forward, we're going to need 1.5 million-ish in that fund, because it is based on growing enrollment of children. The way it works, what we are, as of July 1, going to begin doing is reimbursing 50% cost share of every local program that currently is operating in the state. And based on the number of children enrolled today, we will exceed the $500,000 mark for FY23. We're going to absorb that overage out of the Early Childhood Infrastructure Fund. For next year, the $1 million increase should get us where we need to be. We will come back next June with hard numbers. How fast, how far have we grown the program? We can do, the Dollywood Foundation is really experienced at helping with projections. So we'll know. What I meant was, we may not need to put an additional $1 million into that to make it 2.5 million. We may need a few $100,000 more, whatever, or maybe we do. Like with that, those are those issues that we want to save and not prescribe the specific line items for FY25. I'd love for us, though, to have a recommendation that indicates that thought has been given among this cabinet about a managed scale up of funding in our portfolio, and that there is a plan. And I think that's what the 2-year amounts help indicate, that we are looking at longer term. It's nice to be able to think ahead, do a little bit of future focused thinking about longer term. We get so mired in what do we need today, but we know through the work documenting all the need across the state that it exists. We could double the size of the CIF through SGF capacity, and there is need, and there are places to put that funding. But being practical is also a very important attribute. So that's where we are. So we will continue to grow the Dolly Parton program. I just don't know the rate of growth that we'll see.
No, that's helpful. Thank you for clarifying that. I just want to make sure that most of all that funding is absolutely needed for this fiscal year and
Yes.
next. So, all right,
Yes,
thank you.
for sure.
Okay, thank you, Deanne. Other questions, comments?
This is Delise, and I truly, I echo everything Leetta said as well. This is so well put together, and I appreciate all the thought that went into doing something like this. I think it's very wise for us to think about this in terms of long-term instead of just a short-term fix. So I appreciate the at least 2-year plan that we have currently. I think we probably would be well served in the future to start thinking even longer than just 2 years for what we might be able to do. I think an influx of these dollars will benefit these programs greatly and benefit our kids greatly. I just appreciate the targeted way that we've looked at each one of these line items to see where those dollars might be best spent. And I think it's wise that we do that again for year 2. So I appreciated hearing that was the plan for that we can start back over in year 2 and say, what did we see and what do we need to do based off of those data? So I think this is a really good plan.
Thank you.
Yes, this is Terry, and I too echo everything that's said. And actually, Melissa, you hit the nail on the head when you made the comment just a few minutes ago that it's based on the number of children enrolled today. So this allows, the 2-year plan allows you to plan for real time and have that flexibility to use those dollars to adjust for the next year. So I totally agree with the strategy behind the planning. So thank you for the detail.
Great.
Let me just ask a couple of normal Kim Moore questions here. So if I follow this right, and we went ahead, I mean, we could change our view about the 5.4 million transfer in fiscal year 25. We're not completely
Right.
locked in. That's just our plan.
Right.
But if we follow this plan, at the end of for fiscal year 25, we would be spending $63.1 million. Am I doing the math right?
I don't have the calculator, but yeah, I mean, we would be.
Well, I'm adding the
Yeah.
5.4 to the 57.7.
That sounds about right, Kim. So yeah, I mean, and that's a big change. That shows a significant progression from where we have been for a very long time.
And that would be very likely to exceed the annual incremental increase, which, well, I mean, this year was 61 million, I think.
Yes.
So whatever the estimators, however conservative they are, so we would be then for sure getting into the remaining balance of the key fund.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I don't want to pass a true 2-year budget plan. I want us to suggest that we think this needs to happen again next year, but next year we need to evaluate where things are, and we need to look at where we think we're headed. I will note this should probably have an impact on cigarette sales. I believe this week the FDA pulled Juul products off the market. So I just share that as a note of a new development in the world of nicotine and tobacco products.
Okay, well, I will share with the cabinet that I think I've struggled ever since I've been on here with the idea that, we need to be building the key fund up to its original intent. That's foolish, stupid. I've given up on that idea. When you look at the history of this, there's no way that is ever the life of the master settlement agreement going to be a significant player as an endowment to support this work. So I just give that, I think, Monica, you sort of finalized my thinking on that at our last discussion. I don't want to backtrack for everybody, but I mean, I think, I guess what I do think the important thing that I've heard in this discussion is I think we need to be taking a long-term view and perhaps start thinking about sharing that with the legislature before very long about this fund and what its needs are now and going to be for state general fund to support this work. I'm not sure that a surprise in 2 years at the legislature, 5 years. I'd certainly appreciate the senator's comments, and those of you who are more familiar with legislature than I am. I know sometimes not bringing things to their attention is a better strategy. But frankly, I think we need to be thinking about, I don't want to get to a point where children's work is dependent on the fiscal situation of Kansas at one given point in time. I mean, I think we need to be thinking about what we're telling the legislature about the needs and this resource, which frankly they've invaded, so that the original intent, and by they, don't take that personally, Senator, it's historic. So anyway, I just raised that. And if that's what you guys were talking about in terms of long-term strategy, I think we need to be taking a look at that. So.
Kim, I think what you were just discussing speaks to the recommendation 2 in this packet I sent this morning, which I did not flesh out because I do think input from this board is critical to determining how we shape it. But it is, I would agree, it's time to gather up the data that we have to bring to bear to support a recommendation to the legislature and the governor that there needs to be additional effort for these are critical programs, infant and toddlers. That 5.8 million is necessary, and unlike last year where we said, hey, we don't want our funding going there, that is right in the wheelhouse of the Children's Cabinet, but it doesn't meet the need. And so additional, matching that from state general fund dollars would be welcome. I think we can make a lot, we can have a lot of discussion. I don't know that we want to be prescriptive. I think we start with perhaps a consideration of a recommendation that there be some consideration for additional funding capacity provided by the state beyond the key funds in the
Well, I think the only thing that's fine. I think the only thing I'd add is I think maybe you've done such a great job here with the history. Maybe we need to do a little projection based on some assumptions about how this whole thing's going to play out over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
In terms of the level of support from the master settlement agreement to support these programs. And I suspect it's going to show that there will be decline in our ability to fund at $62 to $3 million over that period of time.
Yeah.
And anyway, I've heard only positive things about this recommendation. There have been some questions. I've raised mine. I'm satisfied.
I think Monica would like to.
Okay, sorry, Monica.
Just waving nicely.
Yeah.
I didn't want to interrupt your thoughts because I totally agree with everything you say.
I love to hear myself talk. I'm sorry, I wasn't.
No, because I think you brought up a great point that, we've got to look at this, long term too. I agree with everything you said. I did. I have a quick question regarding, and Melissa, if you said this and I missed it, I'm sorry, confirming that you did work with all the different agencies and the leadership teams at all the different agencies who are represented here on the screen to come to this point. I think you probably said it, but I just want to confirm.
Well, it's reflected in the prep document. We reached out to ask for information about, I'm going down my budget with my hand as I do. We asked each agency to weigh in with more information about each of the programs that receive pass-through funding. There's nothing on here that reflects a recommendation that is going to blindside an agency, and it doesn't, I mean, the PAT recommendation, I can open, I think Amanda's on the call.
I'm
and
just
could weigh
confirming
in.
that
Yeah.
it did happen.
Yeah.
And that's all
We-
yeah. And
Yep.
if there is anybody on that, wanted to add or share, that's great. But I just needed to know
Yeah.
that this was a collective approach, that we were strategic
Yes.
in things like match and maintenance of effort and drawing down funds, those kinds of things. So
Yes.
I don't want to cut anybody off that wants to jump on from any of the agencies, but that's my question.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Monica.
And one more quick thing. I just want to say I was in the camp last time of the great big dollar amount, and I am totally comfortable with this approach. I believe it's strategic. I believe it focuses on direct services. I believe it builds on our biggest asset that has just been our solid piece of work for years and years, which are the community block grants that are actually out in building on the strengths of all the different communities that we have engaged. I like the idea of the continuum of home visiting. I think we need to continue to push towards that and realize there's some infrastructure things. So back to the point that was made earlier in our time together. And just, one thing that I read that I want to point out, and I think it needs to be said over and over again, we do not, regarding the child care services, my understanding is we do not draw down what we can from the federal government simply because we don't have enough families utilizing the service. And I would like to just star again the efforts done by Kansas Action for Children during this last legislative session to draw attention to the fact that we've put barriers in place over the years that keep families from applying for those funds. So not only are we not getting kids into safe childcare spaces, we're not drawing down federal funds. So there's my commercial for that. And I'm in support of the information that has been provided.
Thank you, Monica. I want to give a plug to Department for Children and Families for the work that they have done in improving the subsidy rates so that it is something that we can help more providers feel comfortable agreeing to accept from the families that receive it. That is another piece of this equation, and there's been a lot of heavy lifting done.
And an asterisk to my comment,
yes.
Nothing that has put barriers in place has come from the agency itself. I'll leave it at that.
So,
all right, well, I'm gonna, in light of, I think, virtually every cabinet member, maybe one or two haven't commented at this point, but could we move to the second half of this recommendation, since it's all put together in recommendation one, both the amount and the proposed allocation, and then we can do a motion. So let me see, how do you feel about the proposal? If we move forward with the fiscal year 24 transfer, proposed allocation is shown on this slide again in the italicized column. It includes the $1 million that Deanne and discussed that we, I think, approved last time. There was, I think, maybe 400,000 that went into the ECBG or something at that point. Now that's raised up to almost 3 million. And I guess both the SIDS network and the parents as teachers would receive the balance of this extra funding. Any comments about that, concerns, questions, before we see if there's a motion on recommendation one?
Have a general question before we move forward. So in the recommendation, I know you guys have done, I'm just reading from the document here, the historical view going year by year backwards. In the document you sent out earlier this week, I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. So from fiscal year 20 through current fiscal year, the transfers to the CIF, there have not been any to this point. Is that correct?
No, every year there's a transfer from the Key Fund to the Children's Initiative Fund that funds our slate of our budget. So that is the source of the funding annually. So what we're talking about is the size of that transfer.
So can you just touch on just the amount of the increase year over year. I know, I mean, obviously we're considering a much larger increase this year. I just want to better understand historically the last time we've had such a large increase, and I'm certainly in favor of this. I just want to better understand the historical context of it and make sure I'm reading
Yeah,
this.
so that is part of, let me pull open the historic
And I think that I was looking at the wrong line item here. I'm looking at the key find summary from fiscal year 20 through 23.
So there's an Excel spreadsheet that has the actual history that goes back to 2000.
I see that. Okay. All right. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right thing here.
So we have it varies. I mean, you can see the last several years, it was 51.7 million for FY22, 50.4 million for 21, 50.4 million for well, that was approved, 43.2 million in 2020, 58.6 million in 2019, 41. It varies, it fluctuates, right? But that's, I mean, that has had more to do with, I think, outside pressures and issues than it does what's best for this portfolio.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Melissa, on the parents as teachers, Amanda may want to respond to this, but my recollection is that they are 100% funded by grants. These grants and the grants from, they don't have any revenue sources. They, I guess they get local school districts have to provide some match. Is that correct?
That is correct, Kim. So for each dollar of these grant funds that school districts receive from KSDE, for each dollar, local school districts are required to match at least 50 cents per dollar. I will note that the Kansas Parents as Teachers Association has recently begun receiving Family First Prevention Services Act funding from the Department for Children and Families, as Parents as Teachers is a Family First grantee, and there are also local programs who receive early childhood block grant funding to supplement their services. But you're correct that for this parent education grant line item, that's the main source of funding for parents as teachers in the state. What you're looking at here, this $8,437,635 is the only state funding that is going to support that program.
And they probably haven't received regular inflationary increases over the years.
No, they've not.
Okay.
And I think it's worth noting the last time their funding was increased, the match was higher, but it was the same time they got more funding. I'm not sure the history of why, but the match ended up getting reduced. I think it was directed to be reduced to 50%, right?
That's correct. Yes. So the last time that there was an increase was during the 2018 legislative session.
Is this considered a home visiting program?
Yes.
Yes.
So when we talk about this alignment recommendation later, this would be included in that?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I actually know what they do. I just didn't know if they were technically considered in the universal home visiting structure. Okay.
Yes.
Any other questions? Are we prepared to have a motion on both? I mean, the recommendation one on the transfers increasing, and then the allocation of investments for fiscal year 24 only. Is there a motion?
Melissa, would you like us to read it, or can we say
You could just say you move recommendation one if you
as
would like
presented?
to.
Okay, I move to pass recommendation 1 as presented.
All right. Now, is there a second?
This is John Wilson. I'll second it.
Thank you, John. That's now up on the screen before us. Is there any other comments, questions before I do a roll call vote on this? Okay.
Lindsay can, yeah, there you go.
All right. I'm going to ask you to individually respond orally. So if you want to unmute, so you're prepared to do that, that'll be good. Senator Erickson. Let me see if I can help you unmute here, or maybe Lindsay can. I don't know.
Yes.
Thank you, Senator.
Did it on my end. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Leetta,
Yes.
Deanne,
Yes.
Delise,
Yes.
Monica,
Yes.
Terry.
Yes.
I don't believe Dr. Smith's on, but let me be sure. John,
Yes.
myself, yes.
Thank you.
Well, again, thank you, Melissa, for all your time and energy. I think you took our kernel of an idea and did good work with it. We appreciate it.
Well, and I need to share that with our colleagues at the agencies and the staff that backs us up, both cabinet staff and the KU team, because this is a definite team effort. So thank you all.
Do you want to discuss recommendation 2, or do you
I
want to
know
get
if
to the August meeting?
I want to know if the cabinet wants to do that, or we could do it later this year, and even, you know, October, December, we still have time. So if we want to let that marinate and get our ECBG annual report at our August meeting and think this through, I'm happy to skip over recommendation 2 for today. I would like us to take a minute to entertain what is listed as recommendation 3 in your little prep material from this morning. Kim alluded to, you know, the question of is parents as teachers home visiting technically, you know, considered that or not. We actually have, I believe, 7 different home visiting models in the state. The cabinet participates in funding several of them, but there are other sources of funding for other models. It's federal funding, it's private funding, it's our CIF funding. There are a variety of funding sources. So what I'd like for us to exercise both our statutory responsibility to make recommendations that pertain to the alignment and leveraging of resources, and our role, our official duty as the Kansas Early Childhood Advisory Council. And I'm asking that you entertain this motion to direct the state home visiting leadership team, which is a committee that exists as I think it's a federal requirement for certain funding streams that we have this home visiting team. So it's not just a committee that meets just to meet, but we want to ask them to bring back information to us to study how we could be more intentional and aligned in our approach to how we fund these multiple home visiting models in Kansas. There are reasons we have so many different versions of home visiting, different types of services are offered, different programs are responsible for administering some of them. This is basically asking you, as both the Children's Cabinet and the State Early Childhood Advisory Council, to direct the home visiting team to bring us more information to consider whether or not there are recommendations for updating and changing the approach to better align the services. Does that make sense?
This Leetta, I think it makes perfect sense. I support this wholeheartedly.
This is Monica. Having lived in this world for a really long time, one of the things you always hear from legislators is, are there too many? Are there, why can't you all have the same name? What we have seen in other states is that when there's a continuum of choices for families, kids thrive. And that continuum right now in Kansas has been by hook and crook and good people applying for dollars whenever they were available, and just trying to hold it all together with baling wire and scotch tape and doing a darn good job of it. So I think this could be one of the most meaningful things, that if we can hear from the good folks doing it and bringing back a recommendation, I believe it's one of the best pieces of work that we could do as a group, so that we too can have a continuum as other states have, so that families know what their choices are, and so that each year we're not forcing these folks that are providing these high quality services in a meaningful way. No matter where you live, you've got at least one option, in a meaningful way, so that they can do the work and quit trying to figure out the funding piece. So I support this, and when it's appropriate, I'd be happy to make that motion if needed, Mr. Chair.
I'm open to a motion.
I make the motion to have the Children's Cabinet request the State Home Visiting Leadership Team provide an initial proposal for a more aligned approach to funding the multiple home visiting models in Kansas.
Thank you, Monica. Is there a second?
This is Terry Rice,
I'll
the
second.
second.
All right, Terry seconded. Maybe somebody else did as well. I'm sorry, I saw Terry. Now, is there further discussion? Does the term more aligned approach tell them what we want?
I think we can, yes, it gives us the recommendation language. I would say I would add the Children's Cabinet in its role as State Early Childhood Advisory Council. I think we just always need to remind that there is a dual purpose to this governing body making this recommendation. So
you can probably communicate that when you send them the information.
Monica, are you comfortable with that? And Terry? Okay, so that would be the motion, and I think then we certainly would. I envision meeting with the state home visiting leadership team to lay this out, and so yes, I mean I can't tell you that we will hear this information back at a date certain. I think we need to figure out what all is involved, but ideally it's done in a manner that allows us to bring information where it's needed. If it needs to be in the legislature, then we know we need that by early next year. So we'll do our best in that regard.
Well, those who know me through the years know I'm a kind of a crank on this issue, and that I have joined the legislature sometimes, Monica, and wondering why we have 7. I'm not even sure who they all are, obviously, from my parents as teachers question. And from my view, they kind of each grew out of an own separate field of work. Parents as teachers grew out of the education side. Healthy families grew out of the child abuse prevention side, and it just kind of goes down. And I guess I'm not so on to getting rid of any one approach. My issue is, how do we coordinate them so that a family gets the right one? That's been I've given up on this idea that we ought to have a universal home visiting program for all the reasons you guys stated. But I do worry about the fundamental coordination in terms of access of the family to the program that's right for them versus just what happens to get picked up, because they got picked up at the hospital, they got picked up at the kindergarten, wherever. And I've always worried about that. So that may be addressed indirectly as we think about getting a more aligned approach to funding, which would please me greatly.
I think that's the point. I mean, this is a central tenet of the needs assessment work that we've done, is that families are left to connect the dots on their own, and navigating the system is daunting for them. And that's a problem. And it's it's a section of our strategic plan that we work on better alignment in the system writ large. So this is systems level analysis of what is needed to make it easier for families that need to access services. So I think we'll bring lots of information, Kim, but I'm ready if the
Well, I'm not,
discussion-
I didn't mean to, I was not speaking negatively to this motion at all. It's positive. I just, I think the general problem we face is that we need alignment.
I
and
think we've
sincerity.
got some folks who may have 10 o'clock commitments.
Okay,
So,
all right, so enough of Kim Moore. All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any final discussion? If not, all in favor, I think, do you want to do a roll call vote? Okay, we'll do it. Senator, so if you kind of get unmuted here.
I'm unmuted.
All right, Senator, do you support this recommendation?
Yes.
Leetta,
Yes.
Deanne,
Yes.
Delise,
Yes.
Monica,
Yes.
Terry,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
and myself, I do. Yes. All right. And we will, I think, I didn't hear anybody, Melissa, against the consensus of bringing a more detailed recommendation related to your number 2 at a meeting that fits your work schedule, but hopefully yet this year. So.
Okay. I just want to thank everybody for your time and attention. We will be in person at the Kansas Association of School Boards in the big meeting room August 5th at 9 a.m. For our first in-person meeting since February of 2020. So yay, I can't wait to see everybody in person.
No, I haven't even met Senator Erickson, so I'll look forward to that, especially. So, all right. Well, thank you all, Cabinet. I think we did good work today. I feel like this was the kind of work we should be doing, and I appreciate all the staff work that went into these recommendations today again. And I think you heard that over and over, Melissa.
Yep.
So appreciate that.
Thank you.
All right.
Great job, guys.
We are adjourned till August. Thank you.
Take care.
Have a good one.
Bye-bye.